He stands silhouetted against the firestorms of Armageddon, a grim sentinel whose bionic eye burns red with wrath and whose claw, stolen from an orc warlord, gleams with vengeance. Commissar Sebastian Yarrick is not just a man, he is a symbol. To the citizens of the Imperium, his name conjures images of unyielding courage, indomitable will, and victories won against impossible odds. To the soldiers he led, he was an anchor of resolve in a sea of despair, and to the green tide of the orcs, he became a living nightmare, a Hume too stubborn to die, too dangerous to ignore. But in an empire built on the bones of trillions and maintained by the machinery of dogma, we must ask, was Yarrick truly the hero he appeared to be, or was he a carefully crafted figure, forged in the crucible of war and polished by the relentless hand of imperial propaganda? In the Imperium, stories are weapons, legends are currency, and the truth is often buried beneath layers of sanctioned myth. Yarrick may have been a warrior, but was he also a tool, a symbol too useful to let die, too revered to question? Armageddon was never merely a battlefield. It was a crucible of nightmares, a war-torn planet upon which legends were cast in blood and fire. When the Second War for Armageddon erupted, it wasn't just another footnote in the Imperium's endless saga of attrition. It was an apocalyptic clash that would reshape the image of Imperial heroism forever. Commissar Yarrick, by then a seasoned officer, stepped onto that theater not seeking glory, but out of a sense of grim obligation. Yet it was here that his myth would be born, amidst the thunder of artillery and the screams of dying millions. The scale of the invasion defied imagination. Gazkul's orc horde descended like a living tsunami, green bodies blotting out the sun, their crude machines spewing smoke and death. Hive cities fell like dominoes, and panic threatened to unravel the fragile cohesion of the Imperial Guard. In this maelstrom, Yarrick stood immovable, a singular figure who refused to yield. He was no general commanding from afar. He was on the front lines, revolver in hand, enforcing discipline not just through fear, but with a fiery conviction that inspired even the most broken of men. Every action he took, every speech he gave, every time he executed a deserter, all of it fed into something larger than mere leadership. It began to feel like myth in motion, yet for all his valor, there were whispers. Whispers that high command, desperate for a beacon of hope, seized on Yarrick's defiance and amplified it. His resistance at Hades' Hive, where he defied annihilation for months, was real. But was it exaggerated in retelling? Did he single-handedly hold the line, or was the narrative sculpted to eclipse the efforts of countless others who died without name or glory? The orcs believed in him, and that belief became as potent a weapon as any bolter. Gazkul himself, the prophet of the war, fixated on Yarrick like a war god identifying his equal. The strange, almost spiritual obsession the warlord developed with the Commissar added an otherworldly gravity to Yarrick's presence. When the enemy fears you, the Imperium takes note, and when the enemy worships you as a symbol of death, the Imperium builds a shrine in your name. It is in the siege of Hades' Hive that the metamorphosis of Yarrick into a living legend finds its crucible. Against orders, he stayed behind when others retreated, rallying civilians, menials, and broken guard units into a defensive force that fought with fanatical resolve. He faced down the Steel Killers, orc war machines of nightmarish construction. He was wounded, maimed, nearly killed, and rose again. He tore a power claw from the corpse of an orc war boss and grafted it to his own arm, not for utility but as a statement. It was an act of theater as much as survival, a gesture to terrify the enemy and inspire his allies. When he later received a bionic eye capable of emitting a lethal beam, the image was complete. He no longer looked entirely human. He looked like the personification of imperial retribution. This was not accidental. There is something deeply calculated in how these elements coalesced. The orcs feared him as a Humi too angry to die, and the Imperium took that raw fear and refined it into doctrine. The Administratum and the Munitorum spread tales of his defiance, turning every skirmish into a parable, every injury into stigmata. Children were taught his name in the Schola Progenium. Recruitment posters bore his stern visage. To the hive cities and frontier worlds, he became the very face of what it meant to stand against annihilation. But lost in all this was the possibility that he had no choice in any of it. Once the wheels of myth began turning, Yarrick ceased to be a man. He became a symbol whose life no longer belonged to himself. There is tragedy in that. One wonders what Yarrick thought when he saw the artwork and statuary made in his likeness, or read the florid retellings of his battles in Imperial pamphlets. Did he believe in his own legend, or did he recognize the divergence between who he was and who the Imperium needed him to be? Was there ever a moment, alone in the aftermath of battle, when he doubted? When he grieved not only for the dead, but for the part of his soul slowly being consumed by the machinery of myth? The Battle of Armageddon gave Yarrick to the Imperium, not just as a defender, but as an icon. And icons, once born, are no longer free. They are wielded like weapons, just as Yarrick wielded his power claw, just as Ghazghkull wielded his myth. In the end, it's not the facts of Yarrick's defiance that matter. It's how those facts were shaped, molded, and enshrined in the collective psyche of humanity. He became the answer to despair, the story whispered on dying lips, the figure carved into the walls of bombed-out cathedrals. Whether or not the man beneath the myth wanted it, that was irrelevant. The legend had taken root, and legends in the Imperium never die. The orc perspective on Commissar Yarrick is both fascinating and revealing. To the greenskins, he is more than just an enemy leader. He is the embodiment of their greatest challenge, the one opponent who refuses to bow, who stands against the might of the war. Like a stubborn rock in the river of their endless assault, the orcs, with their crude and straightforward worldview, don't necessarily understand Yarrick's strategic genius or his deeply rooted sense of duty to the Imperium, but they know what they fear, and what they fear is the Commissar's resilience. To them, Yarrick is a symbol of everything they hate about the Imperium: order, structure, and an unyielding will to survive no matter the odds. Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka, the orc warlord whose ambitions are only matched by his appetite for destruction, is especially fixated on Yarrick. The two share an almost mythic connection, one that goes beyond mere animosity. Ghazghkull sees Yarrick not as a mere man, but as an adversary worthy of his obsession. The moment Yarrick became a symbol of defiance against the orcs, he was cast in a larger-than-life role in Ghazghkull's own personal legend. The warlord was so fixated on the Commissar that he made a ritual of hunting him down, seeing their battles as a cosmic struggle between two titans, one representing the unstoppable force of the Wa, the other a symbol of humanity's refusal to bend in the face of total destruction. Ghazghkull even reportedly kept a shard of Yarrick's bionic eye, a grim trophy to remind him of the Commissar's defiance. This is not just about the reality of war. For both Yarrick and Ghazghkull, this is a spiritual contest, a battle of wills. This connection has deep roots in orc culture. While most of the greenskins live for the immediate thrill of violence, some, like Ghazghkull, see their war as a divinely ordained crusade. The orc, Wa, is not just a simple rampage, but a religious, almost mystical event. Ghazghkull believes that his Wa is sanctioned by the orc gods themselves, and in that framework, Yarrick becomes the symbol of the greatest challenge to his divine right. The way Ghazghkull speaks about Yarrick, with that strange reverence and rage, hints at a belief that the Commissar is a being of great importance, perhaps a kind of anti-icon, a figure that must be defeated to cement the legitimacy of Ghazghkul's war. In the Orc worldview, only a truly powerful opponent can justify the endless violence they dish out. Yarrick, with his indestructible nature and fierce resistance, was the perfect embodiment of that. To the Orc masses, Yarrick is a figure who represents everything they despise and everything they crave. To the average Orc, the Commissar is a challenge that must be crushed, a symbol of something greater than themselves. But Ghazghkul's obsession takes it a step further, turning Yarrick into more than just a military leader. He becomes a mythic figure, a foe worthy of an eternal struggle, a living testament to the power of defiance. It's not just about victory for the Orcs. It's about destroying the embodiment of humanity's defiance. By defeating Yarrick, Ghazghkul would not just crush an enemy commander. He would tear apart the very idea of resistance that has defined the Imperium's survival against the Orc horde. The Orcs' view of Yarrick as a symbol of defiance is an important one because it plays directly into the propaganda machine of the Imperium. When the Orcs elevate Yarrick to such a status, it's as though they are confirming his place in the narrative of the Imperium. Every time they hunt him, every time they fail to kill him, Yarrick becomes more of a legend. In a strange way, Ghazghkul's obsession with him only serves to amplify the Commissar's myth in the eyes of the Imperium and its people. The Orcs' fixation becomes fuel for the fire of Imperial propaganda, creating a cyclical relationship between the two sides where the myth of Yarrick grows as the Orcs seek to destroy it. Yarrick, the living symbol of humanity's refusal to bow, becomes a tool of warfare in a way few can truly appreciate. He isn't just a man fighting to protect the Imperium. He is a cornerstone of the Imperium's narrative, a figure whose defiance in the face of overwhelming odds is as much a weapon as his power claw or his revolver. In a galaxy where survival often hinges on belief as much as on firepower, Yarrick's legendary status is his own form of ammunition, and in this way the Orcs' view of him only helps to entrench his position as an icon of the Imperium. The Commissariat, the backbone of the Imperial Guard, is often shrouded in darkness, its officers both feared and respected. The role of a Commissar is not just to lead soldiers in battle. It is to enforce the iron will of the Emperor, to inspire fear in the face of despair, and to ensure that even the most desperate soldier fights until the very last breath. Commissar Yarrick, however, transcended the role. His legendary status, cultivated on the blood-soaked world of Armageddon, speaks to a deeper aspect of the Commissariat's purpose: the creation of living symbols, icons capable of rallying the masses and carrying the weight of imperial ideology. The Commissariat's core function is to enforce the Emperor's will, ensuring that no soldier falters in the face of the horrors of war. This is done not only through discipline but through fear. Fear of failure, fear of desertion, and above all, fear of the Emperor's wrath. The Commissar is a tool of control, an enforcer of the harshest orders, and often the final authority when it comes to the lives of the soldiers under their command. Yet, for all its authority, the Commissariat is not a monolithic entity. It is filled with individuals, each of whom brings their own personal understanding of duty to the table. Yarrick, as a figure of this institution, embodies its contradictions. He was both a disciplinarian and a protector of his troops, a fierce believer in the Emperor's will and yet deeply aware of the cost of war. His leadership was forged in the furnace of necessity, where survival was a luxury few could afford, and heroism was measured in moments of sacrifice rather than glory. As a commissar, Yarrick was tasked with making difficult decisions, executing deserters, executing insubordinates, and making choices that weighed heavily on the soul. But there was a unique quality to Yarrick's leadership, a personal magnetism that allowed him to embody the will of the Emperor without completely losing his humanity. His rise to legend, though, is inseparable from the propaganda machine of the Imperium. Once Yarrick achieved prominence during the Second War for Armageddon, his actions were increasingly framed in the context of the Emperor's divine will. His every battle became a parable, every moment of defiance a testament to humanity's resilience. This shift from a man fighting in a brutal war to a symbol of hope was not an accident. It was a deliberate construction, a function of the Imperium's need for heroes in a galaxy beset by endless enemies. Yarrick became the face of that heroism, the living embodiment of the Emperor's will. He became a tool, not just of war, but of statecraft. The Commissariat, in its creation of such icons, is not just a military institution. It is a political machine. Yarrick's heroism was not simply for the sake of victory on the battlefield, but to inspire faith, to serve as a rallying cry for the Imperial citizenry and soldiers alike. In times of darkness and despair, the Imperium relied on its heroes, the figures who could ignite hope, rally troops, and suppress dissent. Commissar Yarrick was one of these figures, a man whose legend outgrew the confines of his military career and became a cornerstone of Imperial morale. But this elevation to legend is not without its cost. Yarrick, as much as he was a product of his time, was also shaped by the needs of the Imperium. His duty to the Emperor became indistinguishable from his duty to the narrative of the Imperium itself. The very forces that helped cement his status as a hero also helped obscure the darker aspects of his legacy. His bionic eye, his power claw, his indomitable will. All of these became symbols, tokens in a larger game of propaganda. The reality of his pain, the weight of his guilt, the constant struggle to hold on to his humanity while becoming the face of imperial might. These are often lost in the grand narrative. The Commissariat is a necessary evil within the structure of the Imperium, a functionary of war that ensures obedience and discipline are maintained. But Commissar Yarrick, through his own unique journey, became something more, an instrument of imperial propaganda, a tool forged in the crucible of war. His very existence was a reminder that the Imperium, for all its brutality, could create icons capable of inspiring legions. Yet, in that same process, he became a man whose personal story was obscured by the very myth he helped create. The Imperium of Man, with its vast bureaucracy and ceaseless war, has perfected the art of propaganda. Heroes are not just made on the battlefield, they are carefully constructed, their legacies shaped to fit the needs of the Emperor's ever-expanding empire. In a galaxy where humanity's survival depends as much on belief as on firepower, propaganda serves as a crucial weapon, and in the case of Commissar Yarrick, the legend of the man became as vital to the Imperium as the weapons of war themselves. In the grimdark future, where hope is a rare commodity, the Imperium constantly seeks to cultivate and reinforce belief in its cause. It cannot afford to let the morale of its citizens and soldiers falter, for without the Emperor's divine protection and the hope that they are part of something larger than themselves, the fragile cohesion of the Imperium could collapse under the weight of its endless enemies. Thus, the Imperium needs its icons, figures whose deeds transcend the limits of the flesh and become symbols that can be invoked in times of crisis. These figures embody the unyielding will of humanity, the conviction to fight until the last drop of blood is spilled. Commissar Yarrick is one such icon. His rise to fame during the Second War for Armageddon was not just a matter of battlefield heroics, though his deeds on the war-torn world were nothing short of extraordinary. It was the way those deeds were spun, amplified and amplified again by the Imperium's propaganda machinery that transformed him from a man into a legend. Yarrick was not just a man who survived a siege or fought in the trenches. He was a living embodiment of the Emperor's will, a symbol of humanity's refusal to bow before the monstrous orc hordes. The Imperial propaganda apparatus was quick to seize upon Yarrick's image as the face of the war effort. From the moment he became the target of Gazkul's obsessive hatred, He was positioned not just as a hero, but as the ultimate symbol of defiance. His every action was framed in a larger narrative. The Commissar who would not die, the officer who would not yield, the symbol of hope for the entire Imperium. He became the face of resistance, and in a universe as harsh and unforgiving as the one the Imperium inhabits, resistance is what sells. This transformation from man to myth was a deliberate process, and it had far-reaching effects. Yarrick's image was propagated across the galaxy, his name spoken in hushed tones in the farthest reaches of the Imperium. It was not enough for him to be a commander or a leader. He needed to be a living symbol, one that could be invoked at the most dire of moments. His presence on the battlefield became a rallying cry, his image plastered on recruitment posters, emblazoned on the banners of Imperial regiments, and his actions recounted in Imperial holy texts as proof of humanity's enduring strength. But Yarrick's legend was not only beneficial for morale, it served the greater purpose of keeping the Imperium's vast and disparate population in line. It reminded every citizen that their lives, no matter how humble or fleeting, were part of something much larger than themselves. The Emperor's will, embodied in icons like Yarrick, was eternal, and as long as the Imperial propaganda machine continued to pump out tales of his indomitable will, the common citizen and soldier alike would be reminded that they were part of a great and unyielding cause. Yet the very same propaganda that elevated Yarrick also obscured the true cost of his heroism. The sacrifices he made, the pain he endured, and the inner turmoil he must have felt as his legend grew, were buried beneath layers of state-sanctioned myth. Yarrick became less of a man and more of a weapon, not just in battle, but in the war for hearts and minds. The Commissar's personal narrative, full of pain, loss, and guilt, was eclipsed by the need for a figure who could inspire and lead with ruthless efficiency. Yarrick's own desires and doubts were irrelevant in the face of the greater need for propaganda. The truth of his struggles, the moments when he questioned whether his life truly belonged to him or the Imperium, were erased in favor of a cleaner, more heroic story. In the end, Yarrick was not just a hero. He was a product of the Imperium's insatiable need for figures that could embody its ideals and ensure the loyalty of its people. His every triumph, every hardship, every victory was framed not just as the personal story of one man, but as the manifestation of the Emperor's will made flesh. And in the harsh, unforgiving universe of the 41st millennium, that kind of propaganda is as vital as any weapon in the Imperium's vast arsenal. Yarrick became the symbol of humanity's unbreakable will, whether or not he wanted to be. Commissar Yarrick, despite his status as a living legend, was not invincible. Beneath the myth, behind the bionic eye and the mighty power claw, was a man who carried the weight of his choices. His legend was born not from blind heroism, but from the crushing responsibility he bore, the sacrifices he made, and the people who followed him to their deaths. It is easy to see Yarrick as the iron-willed hero, the symbol of humanity's strength, but to focus solely on his deeds would obscure the true cost of his existence. In the context of his duties, Yarrick was not just a leader. He was a disciplinarian, a man who upheld the uncompromising laws of the Imperium. The Commissariat, as an institution, is feared for its unwavering brutality. Commissars are the enforcers of order, the ones who ensure that the Imperial Guard, often the last line of defense against endless enemies, do not falter. Yarrick, in this sense, was the perfect embodiment of this cold, unflinching ideology. He would execute his own soldiers for cowardice, for disobedience, for any failing, and in doing so he preserved the very morale of the army. But the cost of such ruthless dedication is not something easily ignored. To be a symbol of hope for the Imperium is one thing. To be the one who personally condemns men to death for their failures is another. The moment Yarrick became the face of the Second War for Armageddon, his personal life became a shadow of the larger myth. He may have begun the war as a man with doubts, fears, and a deep sense of duty, but by the time he stood victorious in the wake of Armageddon's fires, he had become something else entirely. His body, forever scarred by bionics, spoke to the pain he had endured, but the myth-making machine of the Imperium had no place for that pain. It had no place for the guilt, the grief, or the fear that must have dogged his every step. Yarrick's sacrifice became a commodity. His personal demons were overshadowed by the towering figure he was to become. The Commissar became not only a hero to the people, but a symbol to be wielded by the very system that created him. But what of the man behind the myth? How much of Yarrick's humanity was sacrificed in the name of duty? When we think of the legends told about him, of his actions on Armageddon, we often forget that he was human, capable of emotions that went beyond the cold determination he exhibited in battle. The very reason he became a hero is, in part, because he managed to keep those emotions buried, not just for his own survival, but for the survival of his troops. In that sense, Yarrick was as much a victim of his own myth as any soldier he led to death. This raises the question of whether Yarrick ever truly saw himself as a hero. The legends tell us that he was a man driven by an unshakable sense of duty, but there's another possibility, that Yarrick's deeds were not driven by some innate sense of heroism, but by the guilt and responsibility he carried. Was his refusal to die a testament to his unyielding courage, or was it the last act of a man who could not reconcile the horrors he had witnessed with the man he once was? Perhaps the myth of Yarrick, as it was crafted by the Imperium, is not just the story of a hero, but the story of a man who was forced to become something far larger than himself in order to survive. In the end, it's this tragic irony that makes Yarrick's legacy so compelling. He was both a man and a myth, a hero and a tool. His deeds were undeniably heroic, but the weight of his humanity was hidden beneath layers of propaganda. The man who led his soldiers to victory on Armageddon, whose name became synonymous with resistance, was also the man who made unspeakable choices, who executed his own men, and who sacrificed parts of himself to the machinery of war. The story of Yarrick is not just one of heroism, but of the cost of becoming a legend, and the price of carrying that legend through the fires of war. The legacy of Commissar Yarrick, in many ways, mirrors the broader narrative of the Imperium itself, a tale of sacrifice, hardship, and at times, overwhelming tragedy. Yarrick's death, though part of the lore, also represents the Imperium's ability to turn loss into further myth. It is not simply that Yarrick died in battle, it is that his death, much like his life, became part of the Imperium's ongoing narrative. The tragedy of his passing is something to be celebrated, something to be woven into the tapestry of Imperial propaganda, ensuring that his memory lives on to inspire future generations. But how is the Imperium to handle the passing of such an icon? The answer is simple. They preserve his myth and use it as a tool to further entrench the belief that the Emperor's will is indomitable. In the eyes of the Imperium, Yarrick's death is not an end, but a continuation of his legacy. His death, while tragic, serves as another chapter in the saga of his unrelenting spirit. Even in the afterlife, Yarrick continues to serve the Imperium as a martyr, as an eternal symbol of defiance against the enemies of humanity. His name lives on in the whispers of soldiers before battle, in the banners that still carry his image, and in the propaganda that ensures his legend never dies. In this way, Yarrick's myth is reborn after his death. The Imperium, ever in need of figures who can galvanize its people, transforms the tragedy of his death into yet another victory. It is fitting that, even in death, Yarrick becomes more than a man. He becomes an idea, an unkillable force that symbolizes the undying will of the Emperor. The Imperial Guard, the soldiers he once led, will continue to fight in his name. The stories of his deeds will continue to be told, each retelling making him larger than life, ensuring that his memory lives on in the hearts of soldiers and civilians alike. The manner in which the Imperium elevates figures like Yarrick to saint-like status after their death is a key part of its strategy. The Imperium knows that it cannot survive without belief. Belief in the Emperor, belief in the imperial truth, belief in the idea that the Imperium is worth fighting for, and so, the death of its greatest heroes becomes a tool of morale, a reminder that even in the face of death, the fight for humanity's survival is one that must never cease. But there is something bittersweet in all of this. The same system that turned Yarrick into a tool of propaganda, that shaped his image into something larger than life, is the one that consumes his very essence, turning him into a martyr who can never truly be remembered as the man he was. The real Yarrick, with his internal struggles, his flaws, and his doubts, is lost to history, replaced by a sanitized version of a hero who never faltered. The tragedy of Yarrick's legacy is that, in the end, the man himself is forgotten, replaced by the myth that the Imperium needed to survive. In this way, Yarrick's death is a tragic reminder of the cost of heroism in the 41st millennium. The Imperium's need for symbols, for legends, for martyrs ensures that even the greatest heroes must eventually be subsumed by the very machine they helped create. Yarrick, for all his courage and sacrifice, became not just a man but a symbol that, once created, could never truly die. In his passing, Yarrick achieved a kind of immortality, but it is the immortality of a figure whose true self has been consumed by the needs of the Imperium. The myth lives on, but the man is lost forever. Commissar Yarrick, through his legacy, offers a glimpse into the complexity of heroism and sacrifice in the 41st millennium. His legend, so deeply entwined with the stories of the Imperium, raises important questions about the nature of truth, myth, and the price of survival in a universe defined by constant war. Was he truly the indomitable hero that his myth suggests, or was he a product of a ruthless state that needed him to be something more than human? The answer may lie somewhere between these extremes, in the story of a man who was both a tool of the Imperium and its greatest hero. At the heart of Yarrick's tale is a tragic irony. The very system that elevated him to legendary status also consumed his individuality. He became not just a leader, but an embodiment of the Imperium's will, a figure whose personal struggles were erased by the very myth he helped create. His battles on Armageddon, his sacrifices, his unrelenting defiance against overwhelming odds became the cornerstone of Imperial propaganda. But at what cost to the man behind the myth? Yarrick's story is not just one of heroic deeds, but of the burden of being transformed into a symbol, a tool of war, a figurehead for an empire built on the backs of countless soldiers. His sacrifices on the battlefield, his decision to hold the line in the face of impossible odds, were not just acts of valor. They were acts of duty, shaped by the Imperium's need for a hero to inspire its citizens and soldiers. But even as Yarrick became the face of resistance against the Orc hordes, he lost himself in the process. The man who could inspire hope in others was a man who sacrificed parts of his own soul to keep fighting. The ultimate tragedy of Yarrick's legacy is that, in his pursuit of heroism, he became more myth than man. The real Yarrick, the one who lived with the pain of war and the weight of his own decisions, was buried beneath layers of Imperial propaganda. His image became larger than life, his deeds exaggerated, and his humanity obscured in favor of a cleaner, more heroic narrative. In the end, Yarrick's death, like his life, became part of the Imperium's ever-expanding mythos. He became a martyr, a saint, a symbol of the Emperor's unyielding will. But in doing so, he was lost forever. The myths of Commissar Yarrick are often spoken of with reverence, but beneath the surface of his heroic status lies a deeper, more complicated legacy. one that reflects the Imperium's endless struggle not only to survive, but to maintain its grip on power, faith, and control. As much as Yarrick became a symbol of humanity's unyielding spirit, his story also represents the cost of living within the vast, suffocating bureaucracy that rules over the Imperium. Heroes like him, shaped into tools of state propaganda, must navigate a galaxy where even the most valiant of acts can become distorted and ultimately serve to cement the foundations of a corrupt empire. The Imperium is an empire of contradictions, built on the backs of those who fight and die, but also one that demands unwavering faith and loyalty. Yarrick was forged by these contradictions, not as a servant of the Emperor alone, but as an instrument of a greater mechanism. His rise to prominence was as much about his natural talents and unshakable resolve as it was about the way in which his image fit the needs of the Imperium's state apparatus. The system that created Yarrick needed someone to embody its ideals, to inspire its soldiers to fight on despite the overwhelming odds. But in doing so, they stripped him of his individuality, leaving behind a figure whose every victory was absorbed by the machinery that made him great. The reality of Yarrick's role, as both a servant of the Emperor and an enforcer of Imperial doctrine, presents a bittersweet irony. He became a hero in the eyes of humanity, but at the expense of his own humanity. In many ways, Yarrick's very existence was proof of the Imperium's ultimate philosophy, that no individual, no matter how skilled or capable, is greater than the machine of war itself. The individual who rises above the rest, whose deeds and spirit transcend ordinary human limitations, is transformed into a cog within that machine. Yarrick may have fought for the survival of humanity, but in the end he became a symbol of imperial dogma, and his existence was tied to the survival of a system that demanded his sacrifices, and those of countless others, for its own perpetuation. In the face of overwhelming enemies, the Imperium does not just need warriors, it needs figures like Yarrick, men whose legend can inspire billions to lay down their lives without question, and yet, in the process, the individual is lost, buried under the weight of the collective myth. Yarrick's mythos could be seen as a reflection of the grand narrative the Imperium itself has woven over millennia. The Imperium is a vast empire of contradictions, a society built upon sacrifice, fear, and control, yet one that relies on the faith of its people to fuel its war machine. As much as the Imperium relies on the creation of legends like Yarrick to rally the people and maintain order, it also requires a populace that is willing to blindly follow the will of the Emperor, and the propaganda that seeks to manipulate and control them. Yarrick's myth not only serves as a symbol of imperial strength, but also as a reminder that in the Imperium there are no true heroes, only those who serve the will of the state, who live and die for a cause far greater than themselves. Even the greatest among them, like Yarrick, must eventually fall into the machinery that created them. This manipulation of Yarrick's legend is not a failure of the Imperium system, but rather a testament to its efficiency. The propaganda that surrounds his name is part of a much larger plan, one designed to reinforce the ideals of the Imperium and ensure that those who fight on its behalf do so with the knowledge that they are part of something eternal. The creation of myths like Yarrick's serves as a psychological tool to maintain unity within the ranks of the Imperial Guard, to ensure that every soldier who marches into battle does so with the belief that they are not just fighting for survival, but for a cause greater than themselves. And this belief, this sense of purpose, is what allows the Imperium to continue its eternal war, even as it grinds forward with the relentless force of a galaxy-spanning machine. Yarrick's journey, from a man struggling to survive to a legend who could inspire millions, is a perfect reflection of the Imperium's own never-ending struggle to preserve its existence in a hostile galaxy. In many ways, he became the embodiment of everything the Imperium stands for: sacrifice, discipline, and a complete surrender of the self to the greater cause. As a living symbol of imperial power, Yarrick's story was shaped and molded to serve the needs of the Imperium, his victories and tragedies woven into the fabric of a narrative designed to reinforce the values of obedience, duty, and loyalty to the Emperor. But at the heart of this narrative lies a darker truth. The system that created Yarrick, the very same system that shaped him into the legend he became, is one that consumes its heroes. Like the Imperium itself, Yarrick was shaped by the demands of a state that valued power over individuality, myth over truth. His heroism, though undeniably real, was ultimately a tool for the Imperium's survival, a tool that, once forged, could no longer be controlled. The man who once fought for the survival of humanity became a figure whose true self was lost in the shuffle of state propaganda and legend-making. This paradox, the creation of a hero whose true identity is obscured by the very system that elevated him, is at the core of Yarrick's legacy. His myth is as much about the machine of the Imperium as it is about the man who embodied it. In the end, Yarrick was both a hero and a victim, a symbol of human resilience and the cost of becoming a living legend. His death, while tragic, only served to further cement his place in the Imperium's endless cycle of war, reinforcing the idea that even in death, heroes like him are never truly gone. They are always needed, always remembered, always part of the system that created them. Commissar Yarrick's mythos, though captivating and inspiring, serves as a reflection of something far darker and more complex within the Imperium. The truth is that Yarrick, for all his heroism and unyielding will, was ultimately shaped and molded by the forces that sought to control the very essence of human will. His story is not just one of personal valor and unshakable loyalty to the Emperor. It is also a narrative crafted by the Imperium's ever-hungry propaganda machine, which carefully sculpted his identity to meet the needs of a society built on control and sacrifice. While Yarrick's actions during the Second War for Armageddon were undeniably heroic, the larger question remains: how much of what we know about him is a reflection of reality, and how much is a manufactured myth? The Imperium, which thrives on the myth of its heroes, needs figures like Yarrick to hold up as beacons of hope, not just for the soldiers on the battlefield, but for the citizens back home who cling to the belief that the Emperor's divine will ensures humanity's survival. Yarrick became something more than a warrior. He became a tool in the psychological warfare waged by the Imperium against the very people it governs. His story, amplified by endless propaganda, ensured that his name was synonymous with resilience, courage, and ultimate sacrifice. Yet, in the process, the man behind the myth became obscured, his personal struggles and sacrifices lost in the overwhelming force of his legend. In the Imperium, symbols are often more powerful than the individuals who embody them. Yarrick's rise to fame is a prime example of how the needs of the state shaped his role as a hero. He was no longer just a soldier fighting for survival. He was a carefully constructed figurehead for the Imperium's grand narrative. The Commissariat, and indeed the Imperium itself, required heroes to rally the people, to provide them with the belief that the fight for humanity's survival was not a futile endeavor. The Imperium needed men like Yarrick to prove that resistance could triumph over the bleakest of odds, and that even in the face of annihilation, the Emperor's will would be done. However, this heroism was not without its costs. The very nature of Imperial propaganda demanded that Yarrick's story be stripped of any flaws, weaknesses, or personal doubts. The truth of his struggles, the emotional toll of war, the guilt of countless lives lost, and the weight of his unyielding responsibility were overshadowed by the legend of a man who could do no wrong. This elevation of Yarrick to near-saintly status has the paradoxical effect of erasing the complexity of his character, reducing him to a symbol of unwavering resolve rather than a man who fought against the same internal struggles that any soldier in the Imperium might face. This transformation from man to myth is not unique to Yarrick. In fact, it is a central tenet of the Imperium's culture. The idea that individuals are nothing compared to the collective will of the Emperor and the needs of the Imperium. The creation of heroes like Yarrick is a necessary function of this system, as it ensures that even in the most dire of circumstances, the Imperium's citizens and soldiers will continue to fight, knowing that their sacrifices will be enshrined in the legends of history. But in doing so, the Imperium erases the very humanity of these individuals, turning them into tools, weapons of belief that can be wielded for propaganda purposes. The tragedy of Yarrick's story lies not only in the sacrifices he made on the battlefield, but in the way his legacy was used to serve the interests of the state. The Imperium, in its quest to maintain order and belief, took a man who fought for survival and turned him into a symbol of something greater than himself. The image of Yarrick standing firm against the orc hordes became a fixture of imperial morale, but the reality of who he was, the pain, the doubt, and the personal cost, was swept under the rug in favor of a narrative that would inspire loyalty and unity. In the end, Yarrick's myth is a reflection of the Imperium's own struggles with identity, power, and control. He is not just a symbol of humanity's resistance against the orc threat, but also a reminder of the cost of that resistance, the price that must be paid for survival in a universe ruled by constant war and sacrifice. Yarrick, like so many of the heroes before him, was consumed by the very system he served, his personal identity subsumed by the myth he became. The man who fought for survival, who bled on the battlefield, is lost to history, replaced by a figure whose every action is now part of a larger narrative, a story crafted to maintain the belief that humanity, despite all odds, will endure. And yet, this myth, this symbol of defiance, is what continues to drive the Imperium forward. Even as the true man is forgotten, Yarrick's legacy lives on, inspiring new generations to fight for the Emperor's will. The tragedy of his story, however, is that in becoming an immortal symbol, he lost the very thing that made him human, his individuality. The myth endures, but the man is gone, consumed by the endless machinery of war and propaganda. The paradox of Commissar Yarrick's legend is that it is inseparable from the larger mechanism of the Imperium itself. His story was not just shaped by the events he lived through, but by the ever-hungry machinery that sought to control the narrative of humanity's survival. The Imperium, like all totalitarian systems, thrives on its ability to manipulate the truth, to create heroes out of ordinary men, and to turn those men into enduring symbols. Yarrick, as much as he was a real man, a warrior, a leader, a survivor, was also a product of this system, a figure whose very existence was dedicated to serving the needs of a vast and uncaring empire. He became a symbol of resistance, of hope, of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. But at the same time, his myth was a tool, one designed to reinforce the very system that relied on such figures to inspire the masses. The question that looms over Yarrick's legacy is whether the man himself ever truly saw his role as a hero, or whether he recognized that his greatness was a construct, a myth shaped by the needs of the Imperium. For the average citizen of the Imperium, Yarrick was a saint, a man who could do no wrong, a shining beacon of hope in the darkest of times. But for those who looked beyond the myth, for those who understood the true nature of the Imperium's propaganda machine, Yarrick's story was also one of sacrifice, manipulation, and loss. The Imperium needed him to be more than just a man. It needed him to be a symbol. And so, the man who led his soldiers through the fires of war, who defied death time and time again, was transformed into something greater than life itself. In this transformation lies the greatest tragedy of Yarrick's legacy. While his actions on the battlefield were undeniably heroic, the true cost of his heroism was not fully understood by those who revered him. The sacrifices he made, the toll that war took on his body and soul, were buried beneath the legend that was carefully crafted around him: his bionic eye, his power claw, his refusal to die. These were not just symbols of his defiance against the Orc threat. They were symbols created by the Imperium to keep its people in line, to remind them that there were heroes who would stand against the darkness. But behind these symbols was a man who, for all his strength and will, was ultimately consumed by the very system that elevated him. The nature of propaganda in the 41st millennium is insidious. It doesn't just seek to spread a message, it seeks to shape reality itself, to create heroes who serve the needs of the state, to mold the narrative of humanity's survival into something that inspires loyalty and obedience. Yarrick's rise to fame was not just a matter of his own deeds. It was a deliberate process, one designed to make him into a figure who could inspire others to fight for the Emperor. The very image of Yarrick, his stoic face staring out from posters, from banners, from holy texts, became a tool used to rally troops, to strengthen resolve, and to create a sense of unity among the disparate factions of the Imperium. But even as Yarrick's myth grew, so too did the loss of the man he once was. His name was invoked in every corner of the Imperium, his legend passed down from generation to generation, each retelling inflating his greatness further, until the man behind the myth was all but forgotten. The real Yarrick, the one who lived with guilt, who faced impossible choices, who bled and sacrificed, was erased, replaced by the image of a perfect hero, an embodiment of imperial strength. The tragedy of this is that, in his quest to be a hero, Yarrick lost himself. The very system that had created him as a figure of inspiration ultimately stripped him of his humanity, turning him into a symbol that would never die, but a symbol whose true self was lost forever. In this sense, Yarrick's death was not an end, but another chapter in the narrative of the Imperium's endless war. His death, like the deaths of so many before him, became another opportunity for the Imperium to reforge him into a martyr, to transform him into a symbol that would inspire future generations to continue the fight. The myth of Yarrick lived on, far beyond the man himself, as a testament to the power of belief and propaganda. The legend of the Commissar who could not die became a rallying cry for the Imperium soldiers, a way to remind them that they were not just fighting for their own survival, but for something greater. But in the shadow of this myth, the man Yarrick was, the man who lived with the weight of his choices, who fought not just against the Orcs, but against his own demons, was forgotten. The true cost of his heroism was buried beneath layers of propaganda until all that remained was the legend. Yarrick's myth, like all myths, was stripped of its complexity, its pain, and its humanity, and in the end it was the myth that survived, not the man. The myth became eternal, a part of the ever-turning machine of the Imperium, a machine that consumes even its greatest heroes. Yarrick's legacy, then, is not one of simple heroism. It is a reflection of the Imperium's insatiable need for symbols, for legends, for figures who can carry the weight of its ideals. It is a reminder that, in the 41st millennium, even the greatest heroes are not free. They are tools, shaped by the needs of the state, their identities subsumed by the machine of war and propaganda. Yarrick became the ultimate symbol of resistance, but in doing so he lost the very thing that made him human, his individuality. His legacy lives on, but the man is gone, consumed by the very system he fought to protect. The deeper tragedy of Commissar Yarrick's mythos lies in the way the Imperium perpetuates its heroes as symbols of hope, not as flawed individuals who bear the weight of their actions and choices. His legacy, while inspiring, is more than just the tale of a man who stood against the Orc horde. It is the tale of a figure whose personal struggles and sacrifices were subsumed by the needs of a state that required him to be more than just a soldier. He had to be a symbol, an icon whose image could rally humanity's hope in the darkest of times. The Imperium has a long history of turning men into gods, or at least gods in the eyes of the people. Yarrick's transformation from an ordinary soldier to a living legend is a reflection of the Imperium's broader practice of elevating certain individuals into figures of mythic proportions. These figures serve a dual purpose. They inspire the masses to fight and die for the Imperium's cause, but they also act as mechanisms of control. The elevation of Yarrick into a saint-like figure wasn't just about his deeds, it was about what he represented. His personal identity was crafted by the Imperium's propaganda machine to fit a larger narrative, a narrative that needed heroes to remind the people that their sacrifices were not in vain. Yarrick's myth was designed to perpetuate this belief, to convince the masses that even in the face of overwhelming destruction, the Emperor's will would see humanity through. Yet Yarrick's myth, for all its strength, is haunted by the absence of the man behind it. The real Yarrick, the one who had witnessed unspeakable horrors, the one who bore the scars of war, both physical and psychological, was slowly obscured by the layers of propaganda that surrounded him. The image of the unyielding Commissar, whose power claw cleaved through Orc hordes, whose bionic eye gleamed with unshakable resolve, became more than just a tool for propaganda. It became an ideal, one that represented the Emperor's will made manifest, not a man with flaws and doubts, but a perfect image of resistance. And in doing so, the true cost of his heroism was lost, not only to the people of the Imperium, but to Yarrick himself. The power of symbols in the Imperium cannot be understated. In a galaxy rife with constant conflict and the endless tide of alien invasions, the Imperium's survival hinges on its ability to maintain its people's belief in the Emperor's divine protection. Figures like Yarrick are created not just to serve on the battlefield, but to serve as the face of humanity's defiance against annihilation. His image is replicated across countless propaganda posters, etched into statues, and recited in the hallowed halls of the imperial temples. But as much as Yarrick's legend serves to inspire, it also serves to perpetuate the machine of war that demands endless sacrifice. The very people who revere him as a hero are also the ones who, through their obedience to the Emperor and their service to the Imperium, unknowingly contribute to the continuation of the cycle of suffering and death that Yarrick's life represents. In the end, Yarrick's legacy becomes a reflection of the Imperium's need for myth and the cost of that myth. His name is invoked in every battle, his power claw raised in the faces of those who would stand against the Emperor's will. His legacy is one of unflinching bravery, but it is also one of tragic sacrifice. Yarrick's story is not just one of heroism, it is a story of how the Imperium uses its heroes to fuel its own survival. The very system that needed him to be a symbol consumed him, stripping him of his individuality and turning him into an ideal that would outlive the man himself. The irony is that, in becoming a legend, Yarrick was lost, his true self swallowed up by the very system he served. He became a part of the grand narrative, a cog in the machine of the Imperium's propaganda war, his personal struggles, sacrifices, and doubts lost in favor of a cleaner, more heroic story. The tragedy lies in the fact that the Imperium, which elevated him to saintly status, never allowed him the space to be anything other than a tool. His very humanity, the internal conflict that made him who he was, became irrelevant in the face of his greater role as a symbol of imperial will. And yet, despite this, Yarrick's legend continues to inspire, to fuel the fires of the Imperium's unyielding war machine. His name is passed down from generation to generation, his power claw forever raised in defiance, a testament to the courage and determination of humanity in the face of overwhelming darkness. But in his myth, the man is lost, his true essence obscured by the needs of the state. His myth is eternal, but the man who lived and bled is gone, consumed by the very empire he fought for. In this, Yarrick's legacy is not just the legacy of a hero. It is the legacy of a man who became a tool of a system far greater than himself, a system that requires its heroes to die, to be reborn, and to live on in the myths that fuel the Imperium's endless war. Yarrick's legacy, though, is not without value. Even in death, his name continues to inspire those who fight for the Imperium. His myth endures, as do the lessons his story teaches about duty, sacrifice, and the price of heroism in a galaxy constantly on the brink of annihilation. He may have been consumed by the very system he fought for, but in the process, he became something more, a symbol that will never die.